Lastly, let's discuss the topic of intervals. An interval is a measurement of distance between any two notes. Those measurements are made up of smaller units called steps, whole steps and half steps. Generally speaking, a whole step is the distance between any two white keys on the piano, and a half step is the distance between any white key and any black key. A good analogy for this whole concept of intervals is to think of a ruler. On a ruler, we have feet, inches, and then centimeters. Larger units breaking down into smaller units. We use a ruler to calculate the distance between 2 points. If we think of our unit being 1 foot, 12 inches, we can think of a musical foot being an octave, or 8 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, in the distance of 8 notes, or one note all the way up to its repeated note, we have 12 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. You'll notice that there were 2 instances where I said that there was a half step between white keys. And if you caught what I said before, generally speaking, the distance between any 2 white keys is a whole step, and generally speaking, any distance between a white key and a black key is a half step. That's true, except for 2 spots on the keyboard. And that is right here between the notes B and C, and between the notes E and F. You can pick them out fairly easily if you take a look at the pattern of black keys on the piano. You have a group of 2 here, and a group of 3 here. Hidden between those 2 groups of black keys are those naturally occurring half steps between E and F, right here, and between B and C, right here. Now that we understand whole steps and half steps, let's talk very briefly about sharps and flats. I told you before that there are 7 letters in the musical alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. If we were to, for example, want to find the note C sharp, or let's say G flat, you've probably heard these terms before, but just never were able to visualize them. Now that we know about half steps, we can actually define and visually see what these terms mean. So let's start with C sharp. Here's the note C. If I want to find the note C sharp, I raise that note or increase the distance from that note by 1/2 step. In this case, it would be to this next black key, which is a half step higher than the note C. That's the note C sharp. C natural bumped up a half step to C sharp. If we were to take another example and we'd want to find a flat, for example, if we take the note G and we'd like to find the note G flat, a flat is a decrease in distance by 1/2 step from its original note. So for example, G flat would be right here because we have gone down in distance or decreased our distance by 1/2 step. Something interesting to also mention about this concept is the idea of what's called enharmonic spelling. And your book doesn't mention this term, but it does allude to the fact that there are notes that exist that have the same name. For example, the note G flat, because we go down a half step from the note G, can also be named the key F sharp, because if we start on this note and we increase our distance by a half step, it's the same black key. F sharp is the same as G flat. And finally, I promise, here's the last thing to think about with intervals, is the idea of melodic versus harmonic intervals and the idea of consonance versus dissonance. First of all, if we hear a melodic interval, that's a fancy way of simply saying we hear two notes of a particular distance separated by time or not played together. So for instance, if I wanted to play a melodic third, contrast that with the idea of a harmonic interval where the notes are played at the same time. A harmonic third would be, let me try that one more time. Now there are consonant and dissonant intervals, meaning intervals that sound pleasing or stable and not so harsh, and there are other intervals that sound quite harsh and quite unstable. One of the most consonant or pleasing intervals to hear is that third that I just played before. Another consonant interval could be a perfect fifth, a sixth, and an octave. Some dissonant intervals that sound very harsh sounding and unstable would be, for example, a seventh, which is between the notes C and B. You can hear that harsh sound. Also an interval of a tritone, or the interval of a second. These terms, consonant and dissonant, can be very helpful when you're describing something that you're hearing. If it sounds quite harsh or unstable sounding, you can say, oh, that sounds dissonant. Or if something sounds very pleasing, you could say it has a consonant sound to it. So I hope that this brief lecture has helped clear up a few ideas that were presented in your textbook, and we'll move on next with a rhythm.